Hey friends, this is Waylon Lewis. One of the topics that fascinates me and many of our readers at Elephant Journal is masculinity, toxic or otherwise. What the heck are we talking about? What makes a real man? What makes a real man without quotes? What is bravery? What is toughness? What is vulnerability? What is all this stuff? Without getting into sort of petty partisan politics. What does it mean to be a boy, to be a man, to raise a boy, to raise a man? Is kindness important? Is resilience important? So we're going to talk about that today with a wonderful guest. We bring you wonderful guests every single week here at Elephant Journal. If you want to be notified about them, you got to favorite and ask to be notified about them. Otherwise, Instagram kind of just barely shows you anything these days. I am in Boulder, Colorado, where I was born and raised. And I myself was raised by a single mom to be responsible, to be kind. I remember one day I was beating a tree with a stick, a big stick. You know, it was fun to knock the branches off the tree. They were probably dead branches. And my mom said, maybe let's not do that. It can hurt the tree. And I always remember that moment. We were hiking up at Bald Mountain above Boulder, and it gave me some sense of, plants have feelings, animals have feelings, insects have feelings, which I learned later. So that's my kind of man.
How's it going?
Sure.
Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, good to be seen by one such as you.
Thank you. I'm honored. I'm grateful.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
looking forward to it.
Oh, hell yeah. So what are we talking about today? I've introduced it a bit, but what would you like to focus on?
Whatever you want, my friend. I'll go anywhere. The
Okay, I
world,
love
it's a
that.
big
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, exactly. I appreciate your spirit, Dain. You've written, I think, two really good articles, super inspiring. Um, so let's keep it pretty focused, I think, if you're up for it, around, masculinity, being a man, raising a boy, raising a man.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that subject? Because obviously it's been sort of politicized and toxified in some ways.
Yeah.
Um,
Dynamically.
yeah,
And I mean, there's so much to say on it. I actually wrote a book called Return of the Gentleman specifically about addressing this. So,
there
you
we
know,
go.
yeah, this is
So what does
this
this
is the
being a
thing.
gentleman mean to you? Or what should it maybe mean to all of us?
Well, to me, one essential element is actually liking the person looking back at you in the mirror, but also recognizing that we as men have unique characteristics that are actually gifts, a lot of which are not seen or they're actually vilified. And we live in a world right now where, the old philosophical question still applies, which is if a tree falls in the forest, is the man still wrong? And the answer is yes. And another vital part of being a gentleman is it's not about separating from the masculine and separating from the feminine and only embracing the masculine.
Mm.
It's about recognizing that males and females have all of this wrapped into one. And each of us is like a friggin' snowflake. We each have our own unique recipe for being in the world. And to the extent that we can stop relegating parts of us to some deep, dark dungeon because they're supposedly bad and wrong, and actually let those see the light, we also then get to experience all the other parts of us that we're allowing to be seen in a far richer level. And so it's about getting out of judgment of us and others on a fundamental level, but also embracing the uniqueness of each of us and recognizing one other crucial element is we have a lot of wrongnesses. And one of the questions I ask people is, what if everything you thought was a wrongness is actually a strongness? And what I've found is the thing that is our strength is often that which is most judged and therefore most rejected by us. And we've got to reclaim those things.
Yeah. And that's for men or women or
Yep.
anyone. I mean, you have to, I'm from the Buddhist tradition. We call it Maitri. Make friends with yourself. And people are always like, oh, yeah, I have to make friends with the parts of myself I don't like. I get it. And I'm like, you have to make friends with the parts of yourself that you don't like, the shame, as you've referenced, but also the parts of yourself that you like. Because often we overuse and exploit the things we like about ourselves, and that turns into arrogance,
Yeah.
which is sort of insecurity, another form. Do you agree
Yeah,
with that,
absolutely.
or what are your thoughts
Absolutely.
on that?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's an interesting thing where we believe that if we embrace what's great about us, that we have already been either acknowledged for or acknowledged ourselves for what's great about us, we're going to become arrogant. But what I find is when you do it from this place of not trying to prove that you are this, but actually owning that you are, and owning this is a capacity, this is a brilliance, I'm
Exactly.
great in this area, then what it creates actually is a level of humility,
Right.
and also a willingness to receive others and contribute to others in a different way. And we seem to have, in the spiritual and self-development world, those of us that are the seekers of the world have seemed to gravitate toward this world of self-judgment, as though if I'm in continuous state of judgment of myself, then I won't be unkind to others. And also, if I'm always looking at what I'm wrong for, then I'll somehow be more right and more motivated to change it. But it's a flawed construct. It doesn't actually work that way. In our kindness to us and others, do we find our greatness. And where do we require the kindness more than anything is in those areas where we're judging us, and trying to separate from that as though that shouldn't exist.
And that's often where we judge, for our own failings or our own dislike of ourselves or qualities. That's what we take out on others, even our own family, our sons, our children.
Exactly that. And so, you brought up sons and children, and this is so vital that we, from my point of view at least, and I want to make the caveat, my point of view is my point of view, it doesn't have to be yours. And an element of that I'd like to share with everybody is that what's true for you will always make you lighter. A lie always makes you heavier. So if you buy somebody else's point of view about something, it's not 100% true for you. There will always be an element where it doesn't quite fit. It's got a sense of sort of being out of sync with everything else. And if we can start to teach our children that they already have awareness of what's true for them, they already have an awareness, because children naturally gravitate towards what makes them light and happy, until we teach them they need to grow up, in which point we teach them that they need to function according to the structures of judgment that make a good person rather than a bad person. And from that moment, it's a nonstop state of judgment for us. And yet we need to acknowledge that our kids are not tiny beings with tiny bodies. They're infinite beings with small bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have a level of awareness. And if you approach them as, I want to say almost an adult,
Mm-hmm.
if you approach them as a being, a fully sentient, conscious, aware being, and you treat them like that and let them know, rather than you were wrong for doing this, you ask them, hey, did you like the result you got from that choice? They go, no, I said this, and then they didn't like me because they thought I was being mean. Well, here's what you want to recognize, child. Choice creates.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not about it's good or bad. It's what result did it create, and what result would you like to create in the future, and what choices do you have that will create the result you would actually like.
Oh, Dave,
And if
there's so much here. So when you said like lies make us heavier, it reminds me of this quote by Mark Twain. He said, "If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything." And
mm-hmm,
when you said humility, and I want to get back to kindness and masculinity, that's really interesting to me, and I think almost a radical notion these days. Um, when you said humility naturally is the result of kind of being comfortable with our gifts, I think is kind of how you put it.
yeah, and comfortable in our skin in general. Absolutely.
Right. And there's this great quote from Walter Payton, the Hall of Famer, NFL. He said, "When you're good, you tell everyone about it. When you're great, they'll tell
Right.
you." Like
Exactly.
humility is naturally the result of feeling, as you said, just so beautifully, simply put it, comfortable in our own skin. So why is there this notion of kind of masculinity? I understand there's, positive and negative elements to everything, but that masculinity somehow needs to manifest in like gunning our car down the street and being, pushy and having big biceps but forgetting leg day. And there's a lot of this sort of like aggression is kind of like all hat no cattle, as the Texans would put it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
And since I live in Texas now, I get you.
Oh, there you
Yes.
go. So that all hat no cattle means it's all show, but there's like still not, you just still don't love
Yeah.
yourself or something.
Yeah. Well, exactly that. And so there's two elements that go in. Well, There's probably so many, but if I can try to break it down into two, something my ADHD doesn't allow me to do very often, but I'm going to try. One of them being that, so there's a level of potency that they have. And I talk about potency rather than power because when you get into a discussion of power in the world we live in, power seems like power over others. But
Right.
you could sort of use them interchangeably. But what I found is there's a level of unexpressed and suppressed potency that a lot of these men have that they've never been acknowledged for being, or it's been made wrong, so they never get to show it. So they have where they're trying to prove, and one of the most hurtful or dangerous things for us as individuals is when we try to prove something that we already are. So let's say you, as a little kid, like if you've ever done, I don't know, let's say a men's retreat or something or anything where, they have you just scream at the top of your lungs or do ecstatic dancing or something like that, where you just let go. And for most of us, you're like, I'm trying to let go. I'm trying, because we live in a world that's like,
You're like
there's
so
so much.
tight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. So tight. And so what happens is they're living in a pressure cooker. And this is one way of letting some steam out of the pressure cooker. And why are they living in a pressure cooker? Because they've never been acknowledged that, hey, that thing that you think is anger, what if it's actually potency? Because one of the times that it's actually appropriate to get angry is when there's a lie involved. Somebody tells you a lie, or there's a lie in a situation, and you'll get angry. And if you ask yourself, what is the lie, spoken or unspoken, the anger goes away. It's there as a tool for awareness. Well, in addition to that, we have a lot of these gentlemen around the world that have never been taught that it's okay to be whatever they are in the moment. So they have to try to take all the moments where they're being or doing something wrong and compress them into the pressure cooker. And then to have some outlet for it, gunning your car down the street,
Right.
is like, oh, okay, I can breathe. I'm not so tightly compressed anymore.
And you kind
And
of feel
then,
good. You feel like I'm awesome. Like anger or that kind of display can feel awesome, even if it's not actually awesome or it's kind of rude or
yeah, exactly. Well, and if you look at it, when somebody does that display of anger, you ask a lot of people and you'll find out it's the one time where they don't give a crap about what anybody else thinks and their judgments, you
right,
know? And how freeing is that? But if we can
right.
recognize that all that we're dealing with is within the structures of reality that we learn growing up. And we tend to duplicate mom's structure about all of her points of view and dad's structure about all of his points of view. And as we progress to being a teenager, now it's time to somehow find our own way in the world, but we've already developed our entire makeup based on being like mom and dad or all the areas we're not like mom and dad. And so we've already got a massive foundation for who we think we are and who we're trying to be or not be. And that's really limiting for a lot of the people that are especially the ones that would like to be freer, would like to have a more malleable set of choices in their life. They find themselves in such a state of judgment that the only time they're not self-judging and self-thinking and self-judging and self-thinking, which is what most of us learn, is when they're doing something that is like letting the lid off the pressure cooker.
Mm,
And we can change that because if you look at the element of freedom in not giving a crap about what anybody else thinks, if we could live from that place, but not from force, but from, and not also from resistance, because with any of these conversations, like you pointed out, I can say one thing and we can talk for an hour because there's so many elements of what people just consider inherently real that don't have to be. One of the things I love about doing access consciousness, the work that I do, is these tools are about melting the structure so what had to be yesterday doesn't have to be today, so inherently you have more choice. And so if we could raise our kids in such a way that they recognized, not don't care about people, but people's judgments are people's judgments. That's their point of view. Now, what effect are you creating in their world, and is it the effect you desire to create? But also what occurs, and because I've seen thousands of kids that have done access consciousness, and their parents parent them differently. Their parents don't put on them, you are the source for my future, and don't be you. Their parents ask them a lot of questions, like, what's true for you? What would you like to choose? What's possible here you've never considered? And so what I see in that is they have an ability to be present with a level of kindness, but also a level of potency that's not in a pressure cooker. And you see them being able to function differently in the world. And it's something I would like us all to be able to have.
Mm. Yeah, beautiful. So I guess there's so many questions, but for those who I think often, like I'm in Boulder, Colorado, which is this liberal, generally liberal town, is becoming less liberal and more just wealthy, which is often kind of more conservative. But um, generally, I find, masculinity is not particularly welcomed, um, particularly white masculinity, of course, within progressive cultures where one of the value sets is like equality, justice, equity, everyone is welcome. And those are values that I
Yeah.
love.
Yes.
I love it. But
Me too.
looking like this, I'm almost like, people like me who look like me, and I'm not crying, oh, poor me. But what I'm asking is, how can we make masculinity healthy, gentlemanly masculinity more welcome within loving value sets or cultures?
Great question. Conversations like this are a start. And the thing that I've realized is we can only empower the people, we can only empower with choice people that are willing to be empowered with choice.
Mm-hmm.
And what you see is if you look at the collective of the anti-masculinity that if we can look at the collective and we can look at the individual, but not sure which way to go to make this more demonstrative. So, well, let me start
Well,
in a
to
slightly different
refine
direction.
my question, maybe it'll help, is the point of my question isn't like, oh, I don't feel welcome. The point of my question is we actually want to inculcate or welcome a generation of gentlemen and gentle boys. We want to encourage masculinity to befriend itself and
Yes.
express itself in kindness instead of
Yes.
toxicity. But we're doing the opposite often.
Well, this is why it takes an individual who is willing to embrace exactly what you're talking about, to be present, to be a space for a different conversation and a different energetic interaction. And so, with that, see, the idea that masculinity is judged is based on a judgment and a conclusion, not a judgment, millions of judgments and conclusions about what masculinity is, that it actually isn't. And this is what we do in this world is we try to be so reductive in everything, try to take everything and boil it down to one thing. There's no thing that is one thing.
Mm.
Everything has far more complexity than we're acknowledging.
We
And
like to
unfortunately,
stereotype.
yeah,
We like to stereotype or type everyone and everything.
yeah,
Reduce it. Yeah.
yeah. And except what we have is a bunch of individuals who, once again, are their own unique recipe, who have an ability to move the needle or change the conversation. But those people are often drowned out by those that want to fight against as a justification for not looking at their own shortcomings. So it's real easy to blame men for all the world's problems unless you look at the possibility that you've had all kinds of lifetimes as a man too, because I know I sound crazy, but could this really be the only lifetime any of us have? Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
But that's just one element of something to look at. But what I find is those that fight hardest against are have the most judgment against themselves for what they're fighting against.